Betsy, all good. Betsy's joining us. Hi, Betsy.
Hi, Cindy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Happy end of summer. I guess it's
Yes,
technically for another month, but
it feels like a very hot summer.
Yeah, I went to an exercise class this morning at like 6 a.m. though, and it was the first time I had to wear a jacket outside. Like it was that foggy, you know, when you start feeling it in the morning a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I get it.
Okay, let's go ahead. I'm gonna share the PowerPoint that'll help guide our discussion today, and hopefully let me close that and put it on slideshow now. So we really want today's meeting to have a lot of active conversation, and hopefully we'll continue to have some additional of your colleagues joining us for this meeting. I think we only got one, Sydney, only one person said they couldn't come, right?
Yes, only one.
Okay, so hopefully they'll be joining us. And if you're a member of the public, thank you for joining our advisory group meeting for the alternatives to incarceration study. Just some guidelines. Our meeting is being recorded. We are still remote at Sandag, and so we will be continuing to look at having a hybrid meeting in September potentially. But right now we are recording it. This will be posted to our website. Because this focus is on our ATI advisory group and sharing information with them and discussion, that is who's been promoted to panelist. But if you would like to share any comments, you can go to our website at www.sandag.org/ATI study, and there's ways to share your comments with this group as well as with Sandag. If you're a member of the advisory group and like to speak, please raise your hand. We haven't had a lot of issues of people speaking over each other, but we want to make sure that we're giving everybody an equal chance to participate. And we may, Octavia or myself may call on you to make sure that we're getting diverse opinions that we know you all have. And sometimes we do, we heard your feedback that you want to make sure that there's more dialogue. So we may want to remind you about the and then what we're hoping to get covered in our meeting. But if this advisory group, this meeting is yours, if you'd like us to stay focused on something longer than what the agenda said, please just let us know. So just kind of to review the agenda with you today. You and your colleagues have been we formed 4 working groups. So we wanted to have the heads of the leads on those working groups share an update. So we had allocated about 20 minutes for that to talk about what those groups had done. Each of those 4 groups have met. And so we wanted to talk about that. Our second interim report draft has been sent out to you a couple times, and thank you for those members who did share your feedback. I've gotten able to get back to one individual with some feedback, and there's been some dialogue. And I did get some feedback from one other person in writing. If you have any others, we do need that today so we can finalize this because we have another report due next month. But we wanted to get your feedback on that and talk to you about how we envision the advisory group being able to have more of its own voice moving forward. We wanted to talk to you about the gap analysis overview we're going to be doing and some of the meetings and steps we've been taking on that, share with you some of the project timeline and upcoming tasks, and then allocating time at the end of the meeting for some free sharing by the advisory group. So moving into the working group status and update, I'll let Octavio take this part over to be able to share some information and engage with Jackie. I'm not sure if Jackie, Watanya, I know Charlene is here, or Anthony and Betsy can share some information. Octavio, are you ready?
Yes, indeed. Thank you. So as you all know, following our previous advisory group meeting and reviewing the information we got from the community forums and the community surveys, we decided to open smaller groups to your suggestion to generate smaller groups to discuss specific topics. that we that are specific needs that we found in those in the survey and the community forums. After discussing internally and then discussing with you, we came up with 4 subgroups that started to work a couple of weeks ago to discuss specific challenges and ways to address it as they relate to these 4 areas, which are best practices, disparities, future research, and law enforcement. Many of the advisory group members volunteered to lead some of those groups, and some of them signed up to participate in one or more of them. So far, we have had a first round of meetings for the 4 groups, the last one being this morning. It's been very productive. We've had a lot of good ideas and a lot of notes, and also a lot of proposals or ideas moving forward. So I asked one of the members of each group to just say a few things about what has been discussed in the subgroups. So I will start with best practices. And of course, I don't want to throw Bill under the bus. Bill covered for Jackie on the first meeting, since Jackie had a little emergency and had to leave. But then Bill became the moderator of the group and moderated a very, very interesting conversation. So Bill, I don't know if you want to summarize in a couple of minutes our discussions on the best practices group.
Sure. So when we met on the 9th, in our best practices subgroup, we had a discussion about really what the purpose of the subgroup was as it relates to the purpose of the advisory group. Jackie, as you mentioned, had to go deal with a client who had a need. She was finding a place for a woman to spend a night after having been released from a program with no coordination around, where she was going to stay that night. So she had to present it with an immediate need for housing and a safety issue, which was a great example of the kind of the opposite of a best practice that was a useful example. But then we continued our conversation, and we ended up going through somewhat of an exercise. We were blessed with some members of our group that had lived experience, and so we talked about what we'll say is intercept 0 on the sequential intercept model before justice contact with the members of our group who had lived experience. And the question was, at the point of your arrest or your parole violation, what kind of services and what kind of practices would have made a difference in terms of trajectory? And so we got some good information about the circumstances and the outcomes of what had happened in some real world experiences. And the thing that I got out of it, and I think we all got out of it, was how useful it was to tell an individual's story, and from that to derive a set of recommendations or practices or things that worked, things that didn't work, right? And so we basically determined that as a group, the next time that we met, that we would figure out a way to capture those learnings from people with lived experience, and maybe include more people from lived experience, as well as the information from the survey that was done, in order to use real examples, not hypothetical examples, to as evidence of practices that we would recommend as part of the report. And that was what we did.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'm not sure if Watana is here. I don't see her. So I don't know, maybe I'm gonna volunteer. Andrea participated in the disparities meeting. Would you like to say a couple of things about it?
I had a feeling you would do that, Octavio. And I'm afraid to say that the notes I took, I left at the office. So unfortunately, I cannot give a very thorough account or a summary of the meeting. But I'm hoping that you took notes that you have with you.
I'd like to interject.
Go
Dr.
ahead.
Griffin, since you don't have your notes. So as Bill had indicated, that was really the question on best practices, because this is alternatives to incarceration. So what are asking the members that have lived experience, what would have been that would have helped you not make that decision or prevent you from having any law enforcement contact. And so we asked that question. They gave, and each one of them, it was different, which was amazing, we thought. And so as Bill stated, we're going to come back at the next meeting and then kind of look at those top ones and then determine what that best practice would be for folks who would be in those similar situations, right? So that's basically the majority of our meeting was really dedicated to hearing, Lon's experience, Anthony's experience, and Martine's experience. So we really gave the floor to all of them during that meeting so that we could, as service providers, really better understand what those types of best practices could be to implement.
Thank you, Charlie.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, no, please, sorry to
All
interrupt.
right, how you guys doing? Reginald Walsh with Project Aware. I know some of the things that I saw just by taking a look at the notes, those were all great things. I think what we want to really stay focused on for sure is the work that we're doing, because it isn't one fits all type of situation. For me, after serving half my life in prison, what worked for me was actually being able to go to a program for the first 6 months. I was able sort of like to build my life and start establishing certain things. And it's almost like it was training wheels for me. And I was okay for that, because at that time, I was very, for lack of better words, I was very open to help. And so we might have other individuals who might not be open to help and feel like since they've been gone so long and what they've learned in there, they should be able to access it and use it out here. And sometimes that doesn't work. I remember the first time that I went into a bank to get an account, I cried because they didn't accept me, and I couldn't understand why. I had the money, and they would not allow me to start a bank account there. But I also had the guidance of someone who walked me through that process too. And the process that I'm talking about is the process of taking that L. And that's what we really want to prepare our, for me, man, some of them are my friends. I've done time with them. I always prepare them not for the victories, but for how you deal with the L, these small losses that you're going to take. Because we don't want to give them the misconception that everything's, hunky-dory now that you're home. You're going to take L's all throughout that. And that's where the learning process is at. But what we've seen as these best practices, because I've been going over and over it about what we need, do not forget the victims, provide more mentorship. Those are great things. But I don't think I noticed in there, and I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't notice in there how to deal with failure. I mean,
We didn't specifically talk about that, but that's something that we could interweave in there. And we're going to talk more when we get to the report feedback in the next section. Starting with the third one, ATI members being able to add something, but I think that's a good point. I really appreciate your insight on that.
Okay, well, let me just be on quiet and wait till it's my turn then. Thank you for letting me share.
Oh, it's a really good point. I'm trying to take notes as I write, and that was one, the points I just got from what you shared was one size doesn't fit all, and to make sure that we prepare them for the challenges and the realistic obstacles, and how do we do that?
Yeah, thank you.
Summarizes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a perfect segue to move, just to share a few things that I got from my notes on the disparities group, because we actually discussed various types of disparities, racial, even class disparities that suffer people in contact with the criminal justice system. Women, for example, there are a lot of room for disparities that women suffer. And Betsy actually brought something really interesting, and that was certain disparities that people suffer depending on the crime they commit. And it was a really interesting conversation about the hierarchy of crimes and how, you know, for some crimes that are mostly where the defendants are mostly black or brown, they do not have the proper legal representation and some of the basic needs that they need in order to avoid incarceration, right? Those are like some of my very summarized notes, but Betsy, I don't know if you want to add a little more.
No, I think you said it very well. Thank you. Thank you for noticing that. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Betsy. Then this week we had two meetings. We had the future research and the law enforcement. In the future research, again, it was Andrea, Bill, Charlene, Juan, and Watana. And Bill was kind enough to lead the conversation, but I'm not sure, like, I don't want to throw Bill under the bus again. I don't know, Charlene, do you mind sharing something that was a really interesting conversation? You were very active on it.
Right. So I really think the takeaway from this group, Cindy, was really there. Obviously, you know, we're spending a lot of time, right, in the various subgroups, and then also with the ATI committee as well. So one of the, you know, items that was brought up was, well, what are they going to do with the information, and what future research information do they want? So Bill made a really good point. What are you going to do with it, and what is it that you want? Or what is the board looking at information, right? Because we don't want to go down, you know, a rabbit hole on some type of research information that isn't even going to be pertinent, or it's not going to be utilized. So it was more, now the question is coming back to what is it that they're looking for, and what are they going to do with the information?
If you want me to, so what I envisioned here is, because we've gotten feedback, you know, in the community forums and discussions with this group of, we really want you to look at this, whatever this is. And we hate saying it's outside the scope of our work because it was so specific in the contract. And I know a lot of you all on here have gotten county contracts, and it says, you know, it's a very specific, you need to perform this. And we're trying to do a lot with the time and the resources that we have. So I want to make sure that when we have somebody who says, for example, I think it was Darwin who said, you know, we want to look more at, we think that the county needs to look more at arrest, or more data even before they get incarcerated, or diversion activities, or whatever it is that isn't within the scope of what we're doing, that just doesn't get thrown away, that it's kind of, I don't want to say put in a sandbox, but that we're able to compile that list. And maybe it comes from looking at the data, like when you read these reports, or when we put the final report together and you all are like, well, this is interesting, but you need to delve in more by looking this way or doing something different. So whether it's data that's outside the scope, other data sources, something that we're limited on in terms of how we sampled, like our community survey. You know, we've been very clear, like this is not random. It's 2,000, you know, it was 2,000 people. We had a meeting with 211 today, trying to get at this needs gap analysis and talking about all the services they provide. And when I was on the phone with her, I was like, you know, it'd be interesting to survey everyone who works for a service provider in the county and see what they think the gaps are, you know, like, or I know a study just came out about how, you know, our issues with getting counselors and having living wages for them. I think the Workforce Partnership just put that out. So, you know, are there different data sources, survey, you know, data collection methods, questions that we can't get at in here, but that this group thinks is either important and was missed in the original solicitation? Or is there something that you're seeing when you see the data or the best practice that you're like, we think that this deserves further attention and resources from the board, and then we want to get that in front of them?
Well, Dr. Griffin is shaking her head, and I remember now it's kind of bringing back some memory. Dr. Griffin, can you jump in? Because there were some things that you had mentioned that would be extremely helpful. And I believe it was the being so stringent on the contracts and so quick to have them. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, so let me try and, because this was an hour-long meeting, right? So we brought up a lot of different things, but perhaps the three sort of cornerstones that came up were, for one, integration of data systems. And I know that this is an ongoing conversation. We have different data sources who all measure different things. And, you know, can we as a county sort of meaningfully use all of that data to arrive at a more pronounced and a more nuanced sort of understanding of what happens to individuals who are just as involved, even as they enter services and exit services. The other point that came up was that, you know, we have probably, you know, a reliable level of data that tells us how many individuals who, you know, exit jails, for example, access BHS services, for example, behavioral health system services, but we may not have reliable data to tell us how useful those services are, as well as what happens to individuals in the long term after they exit those services. A lot of the time, services are time bound. You know, sort of the average length of treatment in substance use residential programs or outpatient programs is 3 months. And certainly we probably have data that tell us how well people do over that time period, but we may not have sort of the more long-term longitudinal perspective in the data that I think we really need in this county to be able to see how services really make a dent. And then the third point, you know, that kind of ties into that is how contracts are constructed. The data points that contracts ask for, is that really based on research? Is that based on a more in-depth analysis of what we really need in this county, as well as how services are constructed? Is that based on research as well? And so those were kind of the three main points that came up there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew and Charlie. Very, very well summarized. And finally, today we had the opportunity to meet with.
Octavio, I think Darwin has his hand up.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you, Darwin.
Thanks. I just want to add real quickly for the future research. I would just want to make sure, because it wasn't clear to me, that we have some kind of distinction or some kind of clarifying remarks about if we request data and we don't receive it, for example, from law enforcement, that's not just necessarily put in future research, that we're clear about that, versus project areas that we couldn't get to because we didn't have the time, or other areas that we think in the future might be useful. That makes sense.
Yeah, I got the note. Thank you.
Yeah, Darwin, thank you. And yeah, I think that was discussed in one of the groups, and I think I have it here in my notes, so we will we'll make sure to follow up on that. And then on law enforcement this morning, Betsy kindly agreed to lead the conversation. and agreed to provide a few comments about today's discussion. Betsy.
Me too. For those few people who were in the group, please don't hesitate to chime in. I'm going to try and summarize what we talked about and give it some conclusion. So it's clear that the punchline for our subgroup is that law enforcement diversion is really essential to a significant part of alternatives to incarceration. And so lots of the discussion we had was about this whole question of law enforcement's involvement and how that might, how there might be alternatives to that. And so, a couple things. One was there's an observation that the police complain that they're understaffed, but then as an outsider, you'll drive by or be in a drive-by and you'll see that there are 5 cars on a 1-person police stop, and you go, how can you be understaffed if you've got 5 cars on 1 person? That seems a bit strange, but it was an example of the ways in which law enforcement sees themselves. The way I take it is law enforcement sees itself and its job and what it's doing in one way. And I think our group and the community is beginning to look and seeing that their job is different. And I think that's really important. So the other thing we talked about was there are problems of being so many homeless people and people with mental health problems, people who are generally living on the streets, and they're highly exposed to law enforcement, and they're being arrested for various crimes from loitering to carrying. So you have to make those distinctions. And the question is law enforcement the best people to be working with people who are loitering, who are homeless, who have some mental health problems that are living on the streets, and for those who are committing more serious crime? How do you make that distinction? I hope I'm representing the group well. The other thing is that there just needs to be a greater emphasis, is what we talked about, a greater need to reduce the number of people who are arrested for nonviolent life in the streets. And there's a need to support law enforcement diversion for purposes of prevention, was our thought. So I had mentioned something about why weren't we forming partnerships for the purposes of gaining success? Partnerships, I mean, that why isn't law enforcement and the criminal justice system and people from that system more involved in our advisory committee and our subgroups? Because it seemed to me, naively so probably, that we make recommendations to those authorities, and they're the ones who have to implement whatever we recommend or whatever the Board of Supervisors suggests be recommended. And personally, my experience with that, I worked for the county for 7 years. It just seems like a disaster in terms of implementation. But the response was that there's a great deal of mistrust between police and other people from the district attorney's office sitting on committees and partnering, because the partnership seems to be driven one way, which is the community would like to engage them and talk about alternatives and changes, and the police and police unions and all of that have their politics, they have their concerns, they have their oppositions to changes based on their perspective. And so the question of that partnership is difficult, if not naive, I think I was kind of told. I hope I got that right. In addition, we talked also about the need for services. So there's a great deal of need for services on the streets in all kinds of ways as a vehicle for prevention. So, and this is where, if law enforcement was operating in a different way and other professional organizations, like public health nurses, like EMTs, like other people were working on the streets and had the support of law enforcement, but not the arm of the law, that maybe there would be a possibility for doing greater diversion on the streets, and that would be diverting law enforcement. And we talked about that, and where it was suggested is that there are other cities, I understand, that are doing these kinds of things. They have alternative enforcement programs, and they're utilizing professionals from other parts of the community. And wouldn't it be great to have maybe one or two of those cities come and speak to us about their best practice and what they're doing and how they're doing it, so that maybe we get some ideas that make sense for San Diego. And then lastly, I would just say we got into discussing how there are many programs for people who are incarcerated who are leaving incarceration, but in effect, the programs have high demand. There are a lot of programs available. There's high demand, and there's not a lot of support and resources for those programs. And that's a need. And that ties into diversion from law enforcement to utilizing other professional organizations to help. So with that, I will ask anyone from my group to clarify if I said that incorrectly. And that's what we talked about. Our recommendation being that we maybe bring a city or two, representatives from a city or two to talk to us about this.
No, I think you've done a great job summarizing this, Betsy. Thank you very much. And I don't know if Darvin had any additions or additions.
I think that's good. Let folks ask questions or any other comments.
I know Reggie had his hand up. I'm not sure if he would like to share or talk.
No, I mean, I definitely respect everything that Betsy said, and it made a lot of sense. And just, we have to have that understanding that those things are going to be a part of this process. But I mean, those things, I mean, the distrust, that's going to be a part of this process. We're not going to be able to get around it. And the only way we get around it, if we continue to do the work and they actually see some of this collaborative actually working. I don't have no other way to say it, but systems can't help themselves. That's how they're built. We know this. We literally got to tear a system down and build it back up for it to be built differently, and we can't do that. So we have to just make do with what we have. As a program, a grassroots program, formerly incarcerated, lived experience individual, I do have the opportunities to work with the district attorney's office, to work with the county and do work with them and receive contracts by them. But there's so many grassroots programs like myself that said, look, man, we're not doing anything with them. We tend not to. And for us to sort of like come to the realization doesn't mean we're giving up. What it means is that we have to continue to plot forward and see if you could get someone else besides Reggie. Maybe we might get another grassroots program, but it starts by not being so open with the distrust of individuals like myself. We just can't be so open, even if you guys might have some distrust. That's the only thing I could think of as far as words to say. Even if you have that, you mustn't be so open about it. Because what it does is we see it, and then it's almost like I knew that already. And I just hope that gives you just some insight on that aspect. Because we already know as grassroots programs, we're not getting the money. We're getting the crumbs that goes to the systems, and the systems give us, and when I say systems, it's those bigger organizations, it's the county. And when we see you guys openly fighting about taking money and getting money, that, man, should we be getting that? It just doesn't sit well with a lot of people. But those are our realities, though. Thank you.
Yeah, let me add real quickly, just for clarity's sake, for support what Betsy said. The main thing we were looking at is law enforcement's role in the incarceration rate. So for our contributions for alternatives to incarceration is if law enforcement changes and they arrest less people, then less people will be incarcerated. And we believe there's a lot of low-level offenses and a lot of practices that police use that can be changed that wouldn't change the incarceration rate. So I just want to make sure we're clear about the main thrust of what we did this morning. Thanks.
Darwin, thank you. That's a really great summary of a key piece of our work. Thank you.
Thanks. Lon, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to go ahead and piggyback off of what Reggie had noted about the grassroots organization. I mean, these membership-based organizations, they do need more resources. The membership-based organizations, these are the orgs that are doing the door-to-door work, that are actually doing the footwork, and they're actually in the field with folks from the community. They're making contacts and providing whatever service they can provide, except that they're limited in resources because of the funding. I know the membership-based orgs we do, because I am part of a membership org as well. They do a lot of things as far as like leadership development and base building, and with those things, that's what's building trust within the community and within our neighborhoods. So, like I was saying, I was picking off of Reggie. Like, we need those resources in these grassroots organizations, and so you know, maybe that could be an idea that could be put into the practices or something.
No, definitely. Thank you. We'll note that when we're looking at the recommendations for this report. And then again, when we talk more on later, we want to make sure that this group has a direct voice too. If you all think that there's something that we're not putting enough emphasis on, because we keep trying to come back to the data, but there's experience that you all have like this that we don't, that wasn't part of the thing that we actually collected. We want to make sure that you have that voice directly to the board. And I know that they're going to want to hear this voice because they're very interested in your perspectives, your experiences, and making sure. That's why they really wanted us to have this part of the group, and they're very interested in your feedback. So thank you for speaking up and sharing that. I know we had talked about too, having a joint working group meeting, and the working group has a lot of these systems on it of coming together with those individuals. There is law enforcement on there, and then, you know, we work at Sandag with the local chief, so that could be something else where we have some type of discussion, if you think that would be beneficial at all, to have some of those kind of dialogues. And when we're looking at the needs and services and best practices, I'm not sure if this group knows about the Prop 47 evaluation we did of trying to do some of the diversion, but we want to make sure that you have the information you all need to, again, think about what you want to put back out there to supplement what we're doing, or to state it on your own as an advisory group to the board on all this. So thank you. And we'll definitely look at potentially seeing if we could do something virtually and having somebody, some of the best practice programs, or somebody who's had a lot of success from another jurisdiction, come and speak here, if that would be helpful.
Great, thank you.
Good. Was there anything else from any of the four groups before we keep going?
No, Cindy, I think that was a great summary of all four. So back to you.
Thank you, everybody. So some other suggestions that we that I wanted to, oops, hold on, let me go back up one more. We know we're taking so much of your, Charlene and Bill, do you want to speak before I go into these points? Do you want to add something, Charlene, and then Bill?
Bill, can I go real quick? Because I think Cindy was about to segue into that. Yes, we are investing quite a bit of time. And one suggestion, I think it was by Bill and Andrea, that actually the best practices and research kind of, you know, intersect with each other. So, you know, maybe the suggestion would be to have that group, those two groups maybe merge, possibly.
You mean the two working groups merge? I'm sorry.
Yes,
okay.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay, perfect. I'm good with whatever the advisory group wants, so we will definitely reflect that. And I think that making sure that you have the best use of your time and you're not overlapping is definitely makes sense. Bill, did you have something else?
Yeah, did you just say that Sandag did a Prop 47 evaluation for San Diego County?
So we didn't evaluate the effect of Prop 47. per se, but what we did was when they got the grant funds through the state to fund diversion programs for the population that's very similar to this population, we did evaluate, we were the evaluator for those two programs, the COSAR and the SMART, with the city attorney and the county. And we can send out links to those final reports and PowerPoints that were presented to the county working groups on that.
Yeah,
And
as part of the, obviously, as part of the best practices subgroup, I'm very interested in previous evaluations of, you know, cross-functional things in San Diego County, because we can see where there may have been either, you know, someone tried to do something we're suggesting, or there's a identified gap that we're seeing still. You know, it'll be very useful.
yeah, it's when we get into the future slides, Bill, when we start talking about all the data that we're going to try to put together on needs and services, you'll see some of our other evaluations. And I may send out to you, I don't know if anybody's been around long enough or remembers the Connections program. Has it, anybody? Raise your hand. It was state funding. Usually I try to think about, when I think about projects, because I've been at Sandag since '97, I think about like which child was I pregnant with, which tells you how long I've been there. It was funded by the state. It was mentally ill offenders. We were able to do random assignment to conditions. So those of you who know research know that's like the gold standard of research, where they were able to acknowledge that the county, that there were more people who needed the services than not. It was using assertive case treatment, the ACT model. It had care, aftercare services, it had housing. And we were able to show that when you did that whole continuum of services and had step down services and wraparound services and case management support, and the data couldn't have been more successful, showing that when you did that with this population, the positive outcomes. But then when the state funding ended, the program ended. So we'll share some of those local evaluations for different things here after the meeting with you all. Okay, so other things that I wanted to talk about before we got to the open sharing at the end. And so maybe this could be something that comes up into another group, so you don't have another group that's meeting. But we have heard when we presented to the board that there's a big interest in young adults, the 18 to 24-year-old group. We were talking with Darwin, who noted that you know, there's been a lot of work in trying to do alternatives to detention with the juvenile population, lessons to be learned there. So I'm not sure if that's something the best practice group would want to take on, of looking at anything with juvenile or the youth system, or this would be another group you all wanted to add. But I just wanted to acknowledge we had gotten that feedback to see what you all think as an advisor group. I wanted to add that on. And Darwin, I don't know if you want to add. I see your hand raised. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you. And I invited, I'm also on the Juvenile Justice Commission, and I invited my buddies from the group to come over today. One of them, he had to leave, Paco, he's on the Juvenile Justice Commission, and he used to be with National Conflict Resolution Center, and they are the ones that got the contract from the district attorney for the diversion program for youth. And he wanted to come and say that he's available to present small group, large group, formally, informally, if we want, because the link with the Juvenile Justice Commission for our work is that in the diversion programs, we know that a lot of youth, in terms of that track with criminal behavior and getting caught up in the criminal justice system, starts at a young age. So to the extent that you can design and have diversion programs at that age, is another example, connects with our work about alternatives to incarceration. So I thought that might be a way to make that link, is for example, have someone like Paco give us a presentation.
Great, thank you. Did anybody else want to add to that thought about having this be part of the other groups, having Paco come and present to one of the working groups, or a meeting here? I guess this goes to the whole thing with best practices. We'll keep looking into it. Yes, Andrea.
Yes, thank you. I think, as Charlene has said a couple times already, we're investing a lot of time into meeting and into brainstorming, right? We're wrecking our brains trying to come up with things that make sense, recommendations that make sense. I am not generally opposed to adding a fifth group. However, I personally, I would like to know more about how our recommendations are going to make a difference in the end. Because if we're being asked to invest more time, I think it's only fair to also ask, well, what is a reasonable outcome of all the time that we're putting in? We're coming up with recommendations and providing feedback. You know, how is this going to be leading to anything at the end of the day?
I think that's a fair question, Kathleen. I think you're on, and I'm going to take a stab answering, but I don't know if you want to answer from the county's perspective. What I can promise you is if you all had the chance to look at our second interim report, we put every open-ended comment in the report at the end because we wanted to have complete transparency and for no one to say that we weren't, you know, we're trying to tell a story or we're being biased. I really want to come at this project with putting data out there, with putting information out there, and knowing that you all are volunteering your time, that there's no, you know, reimbursement back in any way for the time that you're spending on this. I am committed to putting out your recommendations in there. That's why if you see the bullet here about the having addendums where you all can have a voice to put there, I can't say what the County Board of Supervisors will or won't do. We know that those offices change over time. From everything that I've heard from the work with the current board, they're very committed to this effort. It's been a real change, I think, in board leadership at the county level and their commitment to trying to look at doing things differently. My understanding is that this is one of the first steps towards that. And I've seen it in other areas of looking at gun violence and looking at more harm reduction efforts. So I would be hopeful that it's going to make a difference, but I don't want to ever lie and promise you, oh, this is going to make a difference. All I can tell you is that the feedback I've heard is that they're very interested and committed to knowing what you all think. And I really do think that they're passionate about making the most of the resources they have to not just keep doing things the same way it's always been done. So I'm hopeful about your voice being heard. And I want to make sure that everything we do gives a chance for that voice to be heard. Reggie?
I feel like such the bad guy because when you're saying this, the main thing that I'm thinking in my head is how many individuals say, Reggie, of course, all they want is to get our stories and our experience, but they don't never utilize it no other time. They use our story to get the data, but they don't actually do nothing with it. They get the data and give the money to the bigger program. And I'm looking at this last PowerPoint, and I don't know who actually, I hate that I have to be the spokesman for lived experience people, but I know there are other ones here on the panel. I don't know if they're here right now, but I know there is. And when I look at advisory group members with lived experience share their stories for future reports, I just don't, I can just tell you how it sounds. You know, me, I'm a lived experience, but I'm also a CEO of my corporation. I don't have a nonprofit, I have a corporation. And just last week or earlier this week, I did a training as a lived experience coordinator, training on restorative practice and how to use circles. There were 2 county officials there and everyone else was grassroots program. And I charged for it, but the county officials came. And I'm wondering, has it ever came across to you guys that we continue to share our stories, but we don't see how that's being utilized? And if you're saying it's being utilized for future reports, a lot of lived experience people don't look at the reports. We look at the work. And I hope that makes sense. I just give you guys my perspective. Imagine, you know, we get some report and we actually utilize the lived experience people to do some of the things that we so honestly know that they do. Imagine them being a part of, and I have to say lived experience because me, I actually, you know, I trained probation before, I trained county officials before, so I'm blessed to have that, but all I hear is from the other people who don't get what I get. I'm here now because I get the fruits of my labor. But I'm not speaking for me, I'm speaking for all the other individuals. And I don't want to come off as an individual who has the issue because I don't, you keep hearing me say that. I'm really speaking about how sometimes this would look. And I heard someone say, well, I don't know if I want another fifth group. I mean, I can understand that, because what are we achieving?
My dad used to say, you can disagree without being disagreeable. And I think you're the perfect example of speaking your point of view, and I value your opinion. So please don't stop doing what you're doing, and sharing your thoughts. I'm thinking about like interweaving or putting another recommendation into the second interim report that perhaps talks about the frustration that could be heard by the community that keeps coming to the table and wants to be heard, or challenges and difficulties in county contracts or navigating that system. So if it's okay with you, Reggie, is it okay if I follow up with you after this meeting so we could talk more about what that would look like to add to this report? And then again, if I want to make sure that that gets voiced, I can't promise you, I'm not going to lie to you what's done with it, but anything I can do to make sure that the voice is out there and I'm helping it get heard, I will.
Oh, no, and no problem, because I'm easy to find. You can contact me personally. Because, you know, when I look at add a fifth group for the juvenile justice system contact, I mean, I don't know what that means. All I know is I work inside juvenile hall. You know, as a lived experience person, I run groups in there. So when I hear you guys say that, I'm like, you know, I'm doing the work. So now you're telling me that there's some other stuff that needs to be done, because I'm already working in groups. And then when they come out, I'm part of the resilience program, which is a probation program, or you try to hold on to them as mentors. So in my mind, and I apologize because I mean no disrespect, but when I looked at a fifth group, what's the fifth group going to be added to get data from them? You know, I'm doing the work. So I'm trying to figure out how I would fit in, because I'm already doing what needs to be done.
I hear you. I think that maybe it's something that we talk about when we're looking at best practices, maybe try to look a little bit more and include it in that group then. Betsy and then Derwin.
This is, my thoughts go this way. From the very beginning, I think the very first meeting, I asked this question that Andrea is asking, which is, how will we be any different than any group before? And I think all of us sincerely want to do that. And in a way, I think the Board of Supervisors has sincerity and starts out sincere about these things. So I just want to say, at some point, after reading the interim report, I read it cover to cover, and there's so much information in there that this is my worry. I don't have a lot of experience with this, but my worry is that after we go broad, we need to go narrow. And we need to come in and get focused on what our most highly leveraged recommendations are. Because if we get too big and have too many things we want done, and they are at levels of abstraction that, you know, people are saying we need to help this, we need to give resources for that, etc. I just think it gets watered out. And then I do think, here's what I heard Reggie saying, is that there's a disconfirmation of people that are doing amazing work. So I hope, while I know we need to go wide and really take a look at all the data and listen to a lot of people, I really hope we'll get narrow when it comes to what's our highest leverage recommendations or direction, if that's going to be possible.
I love your suggestion, and thank you for reading the report. You know, we heard from the last one that we had just put information out and there weren't the recommendations, which is why we were trying to pull everything together to start listing it. And I think it is like a list of like 15 things right now. And maybe when we get to the point where we have this draft final report, you know, we can talk, if we meet one-on-one with you all, how we figure out, maybe we do short-term, long-term, we prioritize, we make it more specific. So we would love to, again, and I feel horrible saying, can we have more of your time? But if there's ways that you think that we could prioritize that or make it more so that it's not so generic that it just, you know, gets pushed off, we would definitely be open for that feedback. Darwin?
Yeah, thank you. And let me, I think it's a good discussion. I'm definitely on the other side of the spectrum. I really believe strongly in this work. I'm really glad we're doing it, but I also appreciate what Dr. Burke said. There's no guarantee. Obviously, the supervisors, they could change the next election and toss this complete report, plenary report, or final report in the garbage can. But to me, I mean, the struggle's real and it continues. I worked for a group, the Racial Justice Coalition. We took on a campaign of banning chokeholds. We were told that would never happen in San Diego. Chokeholds would be here forever and a day. We ended up, after 3 years of advocating, meeting with elected officials, organizing, we got a complete ban on it. Councilmember Montgomery Stepp was trying to get through the Protect Act based on racial profiling for the city of San Diego. It's been almost 2-3 years she's been working at it. I'm glad she hasn't given up the fight. It's been a real struggle. I see us as a piece in a larger puzzle about getting and reforms for the police that are in line with national trends. So in that sense, San Diego's, catching up with other places that have already done this. So I think we're on the right side, and I think this will be helpful. I think this will be useful for elected officials, the work that we're doing, especially those that want to get reform and positive changes. And I think that, like the changes we've already seen, whether it's the chokehold, cameras for police officers, ultimately they do embrace these changes and it improves the policing, and for that matter, improves relationships with the community, builds better trust, better respect, because we know that they're trying to improve, and things like cameras, we can see the difference that makes in the policing. So I'm glad we're doing this work. I mean, I understand it's a huge stepping out on faith, but I think to the extent that we're doing what we're doing and the right steps and having the data match up our analysis and connect it to the final report we eventually deliver, I think we'll be in really good standing. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was Betsy, I see your hand still raised. Did you want to add anything else?
No, I'm fine. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't erase my hand.
Oh, no worries. I just want to make sure.
Thank
And so I appreciate, and we were talking with some of the other members last week, and I wanted to see, especially if we have, in future reports, we're doing a third interim report, and then we'll have our draft final and our final. And there may be feedback that we get either from the working group where they disagree with something we're saying, and we're going to have to say, we're not going to change it because it's based on the data, and this is what we're standing by as independent researchers. There may be things that you think we're not putting enough emphasis on, and we don't want to waste your time if we don't take a certain suggestion. We want to give you a voice. So we talked to the county about having addendums to future report. It could be at the front of the report. It could be, we'll figure out how it looks, but it's actually something that would be part of a final document where you all could add your voices to what we're putting out there if you think that there's something that we missed. Again, I want you to know that your input's valued. But to do that, it is challenging sometimes to work with 14 different individuals, and you're not a board. This isn't a Brown Act meeting, but we didn't know if it would be, we wanted to put out there if there'd be anybody who'd be willing to maybe serve as a chair, a vice chair of the advisory group who could help maybe as we're trying to have one voice from the advisory group. And I had some ideas about some of the people who have been maybe most engaged or most vocal, but I won't put anybody on the spot unless needed. So I guess I just wanted to see, what do you all think? Everybody still has an equal vote. Obviously, we're not voting on things, but just wanted to see if there could be a little bit more structure for us to make sure that you're all heard and that you feel that Sandag's just not telling you what you're doing, but that one of your peers is maybe helping to coordinate with everything, like on the meeting agendas and such.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, since I've been real advocate about having our own leadership structure, I'd be more than willing to serve as something like chair, co-chair, or vice chair. So I'd be fine with that. And I would certainly support anyone else that wants to take that kind of role, because I think that would be very helpful for us in making sure that we do have our own authentic, independent voice. Thank you for bringing this up.
Thank you. Great. Does anybody else want to volunteer for, I know at Sandag we have a chair, vice chair, second vice chair. Anybody else want to do that? Or we promise we won't make Darwin do everything. But does anybody else have the time or interest to step up and serve in a second role?
I'd like to nominate Bill or Andrea.
Thank
Um,
you, Justine.
Cindy said this key thing. It's not a lack of interest, it's a lack of time. I just don't
Yeah.
have time to do it.
Yeah, it does. And unfortunately, the same is true for me. I totally would. I just don't know how to manage it without losing my head.
I have to tease you though, Andrea, because I didn't think you had time for the working groups and you're on all the working groups.
I
So
know.
I'm proud of you for saying no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Well, Darwin, if you're okay, we're gonna designate you as the chair of the advisory group, but I just want to emphasize again, that does not mean that anyone else's voice means any less than Darwin. So thank you for stepping up in that role. And we'll keep working with him and all of you so everybody's in the loop. But I think it might just help as we're trying, as you all are trying to author things or put addendums together to make sure, again, I want to make sure that everyone knows for this project that you're our advisory group, but that also you're an independent group that may not always agree with some of the things we're saying. And that's why I want to make sure that your voice doesn't get lost in anything, because it is very important. And then about sharing lived experiences, I tried to put a lot of quotes in our second interim report, which you saw, to try to actually have voices of people. It's funny, when I put the quotes in, I didn't want to designate if somebody was formerly incarcerated, because I didn't want it to seem like that was somebody's only one defining characteristic. And so I don't want anybody to feel like their story is being wasted or their story is being used. But if we think that there could be more qualitative descriptions of, you know, any clients that you serve or something else that could help to demonstrate the projects. Because I think when you can, you know, use fictitious names, but try to paint more of a picture, you know, a picture of the real life challenges, it means more than just seeing numbers on a paper. So perhaps we could talk about that more for our next or final report. Andrea?
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the qualitative data. I think it's so unbelievably important, because as I read the report, and we have several tables in there that document the need, right? So for example, substance use needs rank high, housing navigation assistance ranks high. It's presented in a table, but really in real life, people most of the time need help with all of that to varying degrees. And so how do you, can you imagine how difficult it is to be in substance use treatment, at the same time attend mental health treatment if you have a co-occurring disorder, at the same time try and meet your probation officer however many times you're supposed to meet them, and look for housing, and to all, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for people who come out. So I would really appreciate a qualitative focus, because those stories are what highlight the complexities of this field and this work that we're engaging in.
I think that's so important. Thank you. Okay. This has been a really good and robust discussion. So if everybody's good, kind of going to the second interim report, I figured you were tired of hearing me just talk. So what I did on these slides here was just what you have in the report. It was, oh, Kathleen, did you have a, yeah, if you could give Kathleen, if your hand's up, yes, please give her the ability to talk. Sorry, I can only see a couple people at a time.
Oh, that's okay. Thanks, Cindy. I just wanted to mention that not only, you know, obviously Sandag is listening and incorporating a lot of your comments, but somebody from the county, either myself or Andrea Pella, who's our director of reentry and prevention, is always listening to these meetings as well. And we're incorporating your comments into the working group, which involves the justice partners, mental health partners, behavioral health partners, law enforcement, and, you know, a whole host of people who are part of what's called the county work group. And they also are looking at recommendations. So we're incorporating the feedback two ways, one through the Sandag report, one to the working group. And then as we see it in the Sandag report, we're elevating it as part of the board letters that go back to the Board of Supervisors so that they can be viewed there as well. And so hopefully between all those things, your voice, you will feel at the end that yes, what I said was captured and reflected, and then it's up to the policymakers to make those decisions.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. So for the second report, these are just some of those highlights. We have the executive summary of what some of the findings were. We really focused on the community survey. So again, about how many people we talked to, those who had never, some of the differences when I presented the findings to you originally, I think at the last meeting, I didn't look at it by formerly incarcerated, or we did, I should say we didn't, versus not. So we really did see that there were kind of two groups, two very broad populations of formerly incarcerated and not, who may be different in some of their perspectives of, yes, we need more services versus not. So we wanted to highlight that. I appreciate what you just said about the complexity, and Andrea, I want to try to make sure that we bring that into the report a little bit more, that just because those percentages doesn't mean that other people may not have the need or know that they can't articulate that they don't have the need. But how many had unmet needs, the number of needs, how many said their needs had been met, how many of those who had family members said substance use was, the primary need, having barriers to service, 2/3, and looking at that. We found some differences related to people who said self-reported that they had a mental or physical disability, what those barriers were about being easy to get to or finding out what services are available. How many of the individuals who've been incarcerated said that it impacted their family, employment, and mental health. And then talking about, we did find that personal motivation was cited by many, most often as what was necessary for successful reentry, but we really tried to bring into our recommendations that meeting people where they are is important, but having those relationships, so it just doesn't sound like, you don't need to create and invest in that. So we did 2 pages of, there are 2 slides here of recommendations that we put together. We really wanted to tie them back to both the data that we have, as well as what we've heard in our community forums through our discussions with you. They're very broad right now. They're very preliminary, but we wanted to make sure that we were starting to get towards this. What does this all mean? So if anybody has any thoughts on anything big that you think we met, again, tying it back to the data, but we wanted to, Betsy, I see your hand raised. I can go through these, everybody has the report, so I'll just try to go real quick, but best practice about not everybody should be the same. The need for a paradigm shift, that there are people out there who still think that maybe the primary focus is just punishment, prevention being important, not forgetting victims, ensuring that proven programs are implemented as designed and with fidelity, which does go again to living wages and being able to ensure that we're able to attract individuals to these roles, providing more mentorship, creating relationships that so that services are available when somebody may be at that point when they're ready to change or make a lifestyle change, sharing data across systems, supporting the families who have family members, conversations about, and this is where we wanted to be balanced. There was a lot of concern that there wasn't enough repercussions or consequences for criminal behavior and not engaging in treatment. So talking about that, preparing individuals for suitable jobs with a livable wage, public-private partnerships and removing employment stigma, the need for housing, and then addressing disparities and disproportionality in programs and services. So I'm ready to take notes, and Betsy, I see your hand raised. And so if anybody thinks we missed anything big or has any thoughts on anything that we presented here that you didn't get to share with us already, please let us know. Betsy.
So the thing that seemed missing from my point of view was this work on law enforcement diversion. There doesn't seem to be anything here that either from the data, we can't extrapolate that, or the conversations, but it clearly is something that we all have been interested in. I would imagine that could be a recommendation, or at least part of what I would call the next steps.
Okay, that's what I think. And I'm interested what this group thinks. This is something that I thought was outside the scope of here. If we think that there's a way to weave this in here, we can talk about this. This is why I wanted to have the advisory group be able to say say that, I see Darwin smiling. How are we gonna, how do we think that this is fair? Because I'm trying to tie it back all to data and what's in the scope of the project without sounding like a broken record. And that's what, but what do you think? You're on mute still, I think.
I would just add, just overall, I really like this. What I would just want to add is like subheadings or other, flesh out more detail and connected to, one is the policy, like policy recommendations. And then the other part, is connected to the data. So I think, so for example, for the law enforcement part, we can talk about, alternatives to law enforcement and how they address many of the issues that come up, like nuisance crimes that people complain about. Do you need law enforcement for that? Or are there other ways to address that? So I think there are ways that we can flesh it out and connect those dots.
Okay. I think one thing we heard that I can justify with putting in the data is, do you think it would be fair to say something about, non-law enforcement response to some of these types of crimes? We have mental health professionals or other ways, of doing it. So I'll talk with you more about that and we'll make sure that everyone feels comfortable. Reggie.
This is where I had tapped in from the beginning. I really love this. I just think that for me, when I went through this process, I had individuals that looked like me. I had individuals who've been through to sort of like help me go through this process. So I'm looking at addressing these issues would take all of us on a paradigm shift from a primary punitive perspective to one that includes restorative justice, which is true, so that really is a statement. But I think when we look at all this, how are we going to give this to them? How are we going to give that part about do not forget the victim? Because I'm hoping that you're also talking about those who did the crime. We don't want them to forget. I know for me, that's why I do the work that I do today, because I remember those who I've hurt. And unfortunately for me, I grew up in Southeast San Diego, so the victims were my community. So that's why you see me doing a lot of work in my community, even though I work out there in Vista, even though I work in Carlsbad. I come home, not to get paid, but to sort of like do my work, because a lot of the victims were individuals look like me on the same streets as me. So how do you do that for them? Do not forget the victim. Or are you talking about us who are already ordinary citizens here? Are you saying that statement for the individuals coming home? We don't want them to forget the victims? Or that's something that we have to sort of like, sort of maintain a consciousness of, hey, we're doing all this, but let's not forget the victim. Because I don't think there's no reason. I think we already know not to forget the victim. But could you clarify that with me then?
Yeah, so I'd have to stop sharing because I have the two screens. I think that we put in there talking about that we got comments from people about focus on offenders, don't forget the victims, and restorative justice and the services they need. And I know that there's times too that, like when we've done our interviews with people in jail, that we'll find that a fairly high percentage are victims themselves, especially some of females in the justice system, and they may not report the crimes or get the services that could be available to victims. So that's why we just kind of really wanted to talk about that whole restorative justice concept. But again, if you think we're missing something that's key there in terms of the community or different things there, please let me know and we can work on how to reflect that better.
No, I like that, because I think for me, and it's so funny because I can only speak about the things that work for me. And so I love the feedback on this, because I think those who come home, we need to put them in sort of like a restorative justice process group. And here's my thought process, because this is what I do with kids. I literally pay them to come to the group, and they're getting the information. When the payment stops, they're already part of the process. So having them come and be a part of the process and having individuals from the community being a part of that group and paying those individuals as some form of a re-entry type program, we would be able to give them all these things. That's just my thoughts.
Thank you. Did
But I
anybody-
love everything on here though, real quick. I love everything on here. I
Well,
know it's very, very important for me.
thank you. Thank you so much. Charlene,
More of a statement, back to what Reginald was saying as well, is that, I've had, the opportunity, and I'm blessed that I've been able to work with so many people who've done, multiple decades in prison and who have come out and been extremely successful. But I can tell you one thing that all of them feel is that, different organizations or group want their feedback, want their time, but they're not necessarily being paid, right? And for me, I look at it as if they are experts in their fields, which was the time they spent incarcerated and are doing well now that they've been out. Like the George Chappelle's running a facility, like the Jackie Reeds, like the Reginald Washingtons, right? That people want their time, they want their experience, yet they're not being paid as other folks in their respective fields. And I believe that their experience is critical to everything that we do in reentry. Because without their feedback or their knowledge or their own experience, how do we make changes? How do we understand what needs to be done? But I feel that this has kind of been happening because I've been doing this for 17 years, and I've seen and I've, heard them say, hey, but they want, like Reginald said, you want my experience and knowledge, but what do you do with it afterwards? And then were you even, compensated for that? So mainly a statement. I don't even know how that is going to translate.
just off the top of my head, I think it kind of relates to what we were talking about before about making it easier for grassroots organizations to get contracts and value, walking the walk and talking the talk of, and Reginald, tell me if you think this is different, but kind of what we were talking about before of making sure that if we're asking people for their input, they know that it's actually going to be used and isn't just, something that's in motion, making sure that we make it easier for those who are in the community to potentially get contracts is something that I'm thinking of as it's tied to here. And that lived experience is, when you're thinking about people's, value, that your time is valuable, and that this shouldn't only be, ideally it wouldn't just be activism and volunteering your information, that you have a role here, and that it is a role that's based, that makes a difference. So I don't know, I'm trying to think of how to interweave that.
Yes, Reginald, sorry. Yes.
Correct.
Great. Did anybody else have any input? Because we are about 5:20. We were going to 5:45. I can go a little bit longer if we want to, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Lon, I'd ask that Lon would step in and for just a brief minute or so and give how you feel about that, Lon.
And I apologize. I will be getting off at 5:30, entering another Zoom meeting. I apologize.
Okay. Let Lon do it, and then I'm just going to go to what we were going to talk about and maybe talk about our timing for our next meeting, and we'll follow up with Darwin on it because I want to make sure that we get a chance to have maybe a more robust discussion, at least for an hour, on one of the things. Lon, did you want to share anything?
Sure. Well, I brought that up in one of our subgroups about committing a whole lot of time to this, the actual ATI group and the subgroups. So I had mentioned that will our suggestions or will my opinions be heard, as well as going back to the grassroots thing, like we're actually in the field doing the work, putting in the footwork, making contacts with the folks that need the assistance, need the help. It's just that oftentimes we don't have the resources to provide the assistance that they need. So yeah, goes right back to the resources. Like, what are we gonna do about that?
Thank you. I'm gonna add that. Okay. So gap analysis overview is important, but it's a little bit longer than we may have time for. I definitely want your input on all of that, but I'm wondering if maybe we try to have the September meeting a little bit earlier in the month to talk about that. These are just the reports, so that we had time for open sharing by advisory group members. So if we have about 25 minutes left, do we want to do a roundtable with you all? Do you want me to get into what the needs analysis is, knowing that we probably won't have time to cover it all? Speak up, Derwin, as the chair. I don't know if you have a perspective or thoughts, since I'll make you start serving in that role already.
Having an open session makes sense. I mean, in general, given that we've had a lot that we've covered today, and if certainly folks want to chime in, other questions, comments, it makes a lot of sense to have time to do that now.
Great. And two, I know we've tried to make sure that we're very focused on business here. I know that we have a number of individuals in the audience. So if you want to, I believe you can see them all as participants if we want to ask anybody for any input there too. And then we'll send out a doodle poll for earlier in September and give you a little bit more as we get some more of this ideas of how we're going to be tracking the service needs in the community and how we make sure we get this group's input on that. I think that I just saw that we had another advisory group member join us late. Is it Anthony? So I don't know if he wants to add anything, or if we have any other discussions about the report or any future activities or anything else. I have one question for you all. We had talked about having a joint meeting with the working group. And so I really would like to get do we want to meet with them next month? Do we want to do maybe a meeting at the beginning of the month in September, October, so we could take a meeting off around the end of the year? What's the best way for, and I think that would be nice if it was live. That might be a little bit more challenging. So does anybody else have any more ideas about future meetings and agenda topics and meeting with the working group and live versus virtual? Andrea?
When does the working group usually meet?
It's usually during the working day. The county has scheduled it since it's theirs. We've had a data working group a little bit more as we're trying to get data, because I know this group wants to have feedback on our cost analysis plan and such. So it doesn't have a set meeting where it's like having to meet once a month. They were going to take August off, and I believe there's a meeting like in September that's already scheduled to go into some of the things. The working group's working on activities simultaneously, like the sobering centers. Kathleen, I don't know if you want to speak again and add anything to that about what the frequency was, because the working group was meeting before we actually got the contract and this group formed.
Yes, they had, they've actually been meeting pretty much right now. The way that it's broken up is by the sequential model. So there's 5 different working groups, and they have been meeting every 2 weeks or so.
So is there also one work group meeting where everybody comes together, or is everybody just meeting in the smaller groups?
No, there is a larger one as well, and I'm sorry I don't participate in those. Andrea Pella does.
Yeah.
I think that's about once a month, but I wouldn't hold that to me. Once a month, every 6 weeks or so is the best I can probably give you.
Yeah, I feel like it's once a month, and then we have our next meeting in September. And then we've had some special like data working groups that we've called together, like when we were trying to talk about like what data do we need to get for the cost study. So we were talking with those people we were going to get data from, or this gap analysis study.
Okay. Well, my thought is that I think it would be great to have a joint meeting. I'm not sure, probably not everybody's going to be available on I mean, it's going to be a nightmare to try and get everybody in on one day at one specific time. And so I was wondering if it would be possible to join an existing work group meeting that's already on the calendar for those of us who are interested to join and also available.
We'll try that. And I know that when I was looking at the participant list, I think that one person from the working group is listening in on our meeting tonight too. So I know that there's an interest in the dialogue going both ways. And Darwin, if it sounds good with you, we'll talk about kind of making sure what the goal is for that meeting and what the discussion is, so that there's a dialogue, like if we put questions out there or data, or people have a chance for agenda, I suggest data items. So it's not just, we want to make sure that some of the questions and maybe thoughts that was brought up in this group today about perceptions or trust, different things like that could be discussed. Bill, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, this is, I don't know if I'm throwing a old sardine into the middle of a wedding party, but bad analogies aside, it strikes me that we have community-based organizations in an advisory group, and we have a working group that's mostly the public safety departments, and maybe HHS is in there too. And somehow we're all involved in the same effort, but yet we're not, we're replicating some of the existing issues of the community groups and the county government groups not working together. Why aren't we, I have no idea what the working group is working on. And that seems strange to me. Why don't I have the PowerPoint from the working group that I can see, and so that we can use our efforts and advisory efforts to row in the same direction? It just seems, I don't get it. I don't understand why we're structured this way. And I'm hoping that someone did it on purpose, because it's a really good idea.
Well, I can answer from my perspective. So the working group was already created when we got the contract, because they were already working on, and Kathleen, correct me if I'm wrong when I'm done talking. We're already working on trying to make reforms to the system, because it wasn't just, the county wasn't just waiting for us to do the study. We wanted to form this advisory group, and we wanted to do it in a way that was totally random. And that's why I think when you all were selected, I said, I didn't pick you, we wanted it to be something where it was this group of people where we really didn't it wasn't something that this was just we're going to have the usual suspects in terms of somebody that we wanted to have people who were engaged. And this was a vibrant group. In terms of the working group, a lot of the data that I go to the working group on is really nitty gritty data questions about what type of data can we get on services? And that's what I was going to be sharing with you tonight, that maybe we need to get at into the next agenda. We're talking, when I go and share with them, I let them know about our community survey. So just as I gave you a chance to look at the community survey, gave questions and feedback on what the community survey would be. When we're talking about the cost analysis study, and we're talking about the different costs to include, that's where we've been meeting with them one-on-one. So our goal, anything that's been shared with you has been shared with them. And why isn't it together? Again, just because it's hard enough to get meetings with 14 people to try to do the working, and many of you, we're finding these are at night. The working group has been more technical. And I guess when I originally saw the study being put together, we pictured you coming in and having more of a say with your community perspective. While, I don't run the county departments. So it really was more technical and working with them for the data and the different things that we were needing. When we've done our evaluations over time with the county, it's also helping to understand the data, what data is valid, reliable, what are the sources of the data, how do we interpret the data, if we see what this variable means, what's it mean? So that's why it seemed like it was two different functions, you to try to help us interpret the data, help guide the research, and for them it's been more technical, and that's how I saw it, the demarcation between the two of you. But there's not been some nefarious thing to try to keep you separated at any point, which is why we've been trying to figure out how to bring you together. It's just COVID has not helped, and Sandag being out of the office for the past 3 months.
Okay, I understand. I think that for me, you know, since we're all like searching, for me, I'm trying to figure out how the output from our efforts and from Sandag are going to be operationalized at the county level. And I'm not seeing quite, I don't have like quite that vision yet of how it's going to, you know, result in changes in the way the county does things. And I guess I was kind of hoping that we would have uh, um, uh, a interface that where the working group would say, okay, here's the three things we need to help. We need from the advisory group. We need to know what to put in RFPs. We need to know what data standards we need to put in place, and we need to know what kind of capabilities we need to fund in the community from non-government organizations. You know what I mean? Like it seems to me as though there's a break in our work and operationalizing our recommendations.
Um,
I don't quite know how to bridge it, but it seems like there's a missing piece.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's, if I could just say one thing, Darwin, and then I'll turn it over to you. I also just wanted to remind everybody that we tried really hard to make this clear. It was a Sandag advisory group, because for those of you who may go for county contracts in the future, we didn't want to make it where
That's a
you're
good point,
suddenly, you know, so we were trying to make it very separate from the county things, because we don't want to mess up your chance to get a funding solicitation by informing an RFP.
You may be saving me from myself, Cindy.
I am, but what I'm trying to, what as I'm thinking about the agenda, and again, I'll work with Darwin and all of you on this, is kind of saying, you know, like, here's the second interim report. What did, you know, hearing what they thought about it, maybe giving you a chance to ask questions of them to ask questions of you. They can share the work they've been doing, you know, in their group. And Darwin, I'll stop talking and turn it over to you.
You know, I'm just going to real quickly add, because I have the exact same concern as Bill, and so I thank you for sharing that. But my take on it, and I appreciate Cindy what you said, and you've been very kind. I don't know the working group that well, but from the outside, it's very easy to say that the kind of changes that San Diego really needs to engage in and be a part of the best practices nationally, we're not there. So for whatever reason, it's not happening through the working group. And in that sense, if our work can contribute and help us get on track, that's great. Obviously, there's no guarantee, but in that sense, I'm fine with us connecting and being a part of the working group. But I also hope that we, in that sense, do represent a real outside independent voice. And in that sense, we're not something that's simply a part of the system or structure, and that we have the freedom in that sense to go outside the box, talk about things that are not necessarily in place or have been, you know, discouraged before, saying it's not possible, can't do that. And we can really and seriously engage that. And then in that sense, you know, do our work and see ultimately what elected officials do with it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, well, we have a number, we'll be putting together minutes. We'll follow up with you all about the action items and about scheduling the next meetings. Darwin, I'll probably follow up to see if you have time to touch base later this week or next week about those follow-up items. We'll send the Prop 47 report out, Bill, that you mentioned, incorporate the comments that we've gotten back from individuals. If anybody else has anything else, and I'll run by that additional recommendation we were going to add. And then we do want to share more with you the next big three things that we're doing with data are, again, looking at best practices, which we want to share with you in the working group that we're doing from like literature reviews. And then also make sure how we work with the working group here on that. Doing the cost study, so letting you know what variables are going in with that and how we're going to be, what the limitations are, because it's not a cost effectiveness study. And then we are also looking at this needs assessment gap analysis, and also looking at individuals who had who could have been booked but were not booked for a nonviolent offense, and what was their continued contact with the system up to a year later, to try to understand what's going on there. So we'll be talking to you about those methodologies coming up, but we'll be reaching out with the doodle poll for you all. And we're nearing 5:45. Did anybody else have any other? Shirley, I see your hand up still, but I'm not sure if that's from before. So
Oh,
before.
sorry, before.
Okay. Did anybody else have anything else to share? I feel like this was a really fruitful discussion. It was great to have so many people more engaged. So any feedback you have on how this meeting was run or how we keep this dialogue going, we definitely want to hear it. Darwin, do you want to add anything else?
No, that's it from my end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for your time. I hope that you you survived the heat, and thank you for all the important work that you're doing and your trust that that we're actually here and want to use your information and we value your expertise and what you're bringing to the table, and we don't take that lightly. Your time is very valuable. So thank you, and thank you for those of people who tuned in tonight too, also, or who are watching this at a later point in time, and we value your feedback. Thank you.